Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be setting it up so that we can set our experience reward progressions, and then we can go through the world and beat people up. So I beat up this guard, and we just want to see that his progression does indeed get the experience points. If I run over to the archer and beat him to a pulp, then we should see that he gets different level of experience rewards. He gets 30 points, which was indeed what he had in the progression setup. So let's dive into the lecture and see how it's done. So in the last lecture, we saw that we had broken our get health method, and this lecture we're going to be fixing that. So first of all, I want to change it from being get health to something more general, basically a get stat method instead. And how can we do this? Well, we can now make use of our stat class that we've got as one of the arguments. So we're going to give it a character class, but we're also going to give it a stat. In fact, I'm going to lead with the stat because that's the most important thing. It is the method's name. So stat is the first argument. Then we're going to say it's a stat for the character class and this particular level. Okay, so this is how getStat is being modified. Now you notice it's giving an error. Again, inconsistent accessibility. We've done it again. The enum needs to be a public enum in order for us to not have that error. So the stat needs to be a public enum. And then what? Okay, so at this point, what we're going to do is change out the body of getStat so that it actually works with a new progression structure. Now, if you feel confident in doing that for yourself, then do go ahead and pause the video and have a go. Otherwise, just follow along with me. So crucially, we've got two lists now. We've got the list at the top level, which is the character classes. We've also got the progression stats list. So we're going to need two for loops, one for each of those lists. And in fact, we've got another list, the floats, but that one we just index directly rather than having to do a for loop looking for the character class. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have a look and do a for loop, but if I do a for loop inside this if statement, we're going to have lots of levels of indentation. So I'm going to break that level of indentation by just doing instead of if progression character class not equal, we're going to do and then continue. So we're going to break out this loop iteration a little bit early and go and continue to look for other character classes because this is not the droid that we were looking for. Okay, so I'm going to then remove this body, or I'll keep it around because I want that later. And I'm going to include a for each loop, like so. That's going to go over what? It's going to go over the stat in the progression class. So the progression class dot stat, stats in fact, and then we're going to get the progression stat is the variable type. And also I'm going to use it for the name, but with a lowercase p. So then we're going to do exactly the same thing. Basically, we're going to do for if the progression stat, sorry, not the progression class, the progression stat dot stat is not equal to the stat that was passed in, then we want to continue because we are looking for a different stat. And then finally, if we have got the right thing, this is where we want our return statement. So just paste that in here. Instead of doing the progression class, though, we're looking in the progression stat for the health. Okay, so that should hopefully make sense, except it's not the health, it is the levels. So that pretty much fixes it up. Now, one more thing I want to do here is I would like to guard against a situation where we are looking for a level that is not in this array. So the way I'm going to do this is just to say, hang on, if the progression stat dot levels is not the right length, we're going to continue in our for loop. So how we're going to do that? So the progression stats levels dot length and a relationship, not quite sure what the relationship is, with the level that is being passed in. So have a think about that. What do you think the relationship should be between these two? Well, if we reason about it, if we had an array of length 0 and we are looking for a stat at level 2, for example, that's clearly wrong. But let's think about the edge case, right? We've got an array of length 1 and we're looking for this stat at level 1. That should work, whereas the stat at level 2 should no longer work. So we've got this relationship where this would be 1, and at 2 this would be wrong, but at 1 it would be correct, and at 0 it doesn't really exist, but say we had an array of length 2 instead, at 1 it would be fine, at 2, it would be fine, and at 3, it would no longer be fine. So what we're saying is that the length of the array has to be greater than or equal to the level. So another way of flipping that round is to say that the length of the array is in fact less than the level, and if it is less than the level, then we should continue with our search, basically. So that should pretty much do us for the get stat. So now I'd like you to refactor for get stat in the rest of the code base and propagate the changes through there as best you can. And in fact, I want to clarify that in base stat, I think we can make this method here, instead of having a get health and get experience reward, I think we can just replace all of that with a get stat method there as well. So find the errors and fix the errors if you can. Pause the video and give it a shot. Okay, welcome back. So as I said, we're starting with base stat. We're going to change this over to get health, get stat. And we want to pass in the stat class, but we don't have one. We have to get that from this method. So I'm going to change the method to get stat in base stats and this stat that we want to get. So depending on who is asking, they might want different things. We might want health, we might want experience to level up, we might want other things that we add into this enum at a later date. So get stat is going to pass on the stat to the progressions get stat method. And that means we no longer need to get experience reward because that is now redundant. We can just do get stat with the enum set to experience reward. Now that's created some issues, particularly in the health component, which I think is the only component at the moment that gets things from base stat, but it won't be in the future. And it's in 3 places. So we've got one place that is getting health. So we're going to do a get stat and then stat.health instead. And we can do that in the other location that is getting the health as well, which is down here where we're doing the percentage point calculation. And then there's one more place, which is award experience, where actually we're not getting the health, but we are getting the experience reward. Okay, so that should do the trick. Now we need to go and update our progression to make sure that the progression is going to return experience reward for the grunt and the archer. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate at this level here of the stats list. We're going to duplicate element 0 and change the stat to be the experience reward. And I'm going to give experience reward of 10 for the base level 1 grunt. And I'm going to duplicate again the array element for health and change it over to experience reward. And the experience reward for the archer is going to be 20 at level 1 because an archer is slightly more advanced or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Let's see if we can get this. So I attack the first enemy. I'm going to look at the player's experience, see what it's doing. Starts off at 0, goes up to 10 when I kill that enemy. And if I go and kill the second enemy over here, then sure enough, that gives me 20 points instead. So we can tell that it is using the data from the progression, and we also saw that health was still working as expected. So all in all, what we've now got is a more generic way of getting stats into the system. We can add more stats in here, and then all we've got to do is update our progression to have the relevant stats that we want, and we can use it somewhere else in the code base without having to pass it through base stats and rewrite lots of code. So there is a omission here because I had to go into player to look up the experience points. We would like an experience display as well, and we would like those experience points to persist, just like the health points, when we go between worlds or we just save our game. So that's going to be the subject of the next lecture. See you there.